It is 2 in the morning and you are still awake. Not because you are not tired. You are exhausted. But your brain has found something to do and it will not stop doing it. Maybe it is a text message that never got a reply. Maybe it is something someone said to you at work that landed wrong and you cannot figure out exactly why. Maybe it is the end of a relationship, and one specific conversation keeps restarting in your head like a song stuck on repeat, playing from the same 5 seconds every single time. You have already thought it through completely. You know this. You have arrived at every possible conclusion there is to arrive at. And yet here you are, running it again. This is not insomnia. This is something more specific than that. It is the looping quality of the thought. The way it comes back not slowly, but immediately, like it was waiting just outside the door the whole time you were trying to sleep. And the part that makes it worse is what you tell yourself about it. That you are being irrational. That other people do not do this. That if you just had more self-control, more discipline, more of whatever it is emotionally stable people apparently have an unlimited supply, you could simply stop. You have probably already tried to stop. You told yourself firmly to drop it. You distracted yourself. You scrolled through your phone for 40 minutes until the distraction wore off and the thought was sitting there again, patient as ever. Here is what you need to understand before anything else. This is not a willpower problem. The effort you have been spending trying to force your brain to stop is not failing because you are weak. It is failing because you are fighting the wrong thing entirely. In 1994, psychologist Daniel Wegner published what became one of the most uncomfortably relatable findings in cognitive science. He called it ironic process theory. The core idea is almost cruelly simple. The harder you try to suppress a specific thought, the more frequently and forcefully that thought returns. He demonstrated it with an instruction as innocent as, "Do not think about a white bear." People could not do it. The suppression attempt itself kept activating the very thought they were trying to avoid, because the brain needs to monitor for the forbidden thought in order to know whether it is succeeding. And that monitoring keeps the thought alive. You have been doing this. Every time you have told yourself to stop thinking about this person, you have handed your brain a bear. But here is what matters most, and this is the part that should actually change something for you tonight. The loop is not a malfunction. Your brain is not broken, and it is not punishing you. It is doing exactly what it was built to do when it encounters a social situation that remains unresolved, unanswered, emotionally open. Your brain classifies that as unfinished business, and unfinished business gets revisited. Automatically. Compulsively. Not because you are obsessive, but because you are human, and your brain is running a system that has been in place far longer than any of us have been alive. This is not weakness dressed up in scientific language to make you feel better. This is the actual mechanism, and understanding the mechanism is the only place a real solution can start. Because once you know what is actually happening inside your head, the question changes completely. It stops being, "What is wrong with me?" and starts being, "What is my brain trying to do, and how do I work with it instead of against it?" That question has a real answer, and it begins with the architecture. So your brain keeps returning to this person the way your tongue keeps finding a sore tooth, not because you want it to, because something is unfinished. And unfinished things, for your brain, are not optional to revisit. They are mandatory. Bluma Zygarnik was a Soviet psychologist who noticed something in a Vienna cafe in the 1920s. Waiters could hold enormous, complex orders in their heads with no notes at all. But the moment a table paid and left, the order vanished completely from memory. Done meant gone. Unfinished meant active. She took that observation into the lab, and what she found was striking. People remembered interrupted tasks roughly 90% better than completed ones. Not a little better, almost twice as well. Your brain allocates ongoing attention to incomplete things. It is not a choice the brain makes. It is the architecture. Now extend that to a text message with no reply, a conversation that ended badly, a relationship that closed without explanation. Your brain registers each of these as an interrupted task, and interrupted tasks get revisited, automatically, during the day when you are trying to concentrate, at 2 in the morning when you are trying to sleep. The default mode network, the brain's resting state system, will literally replay unresolved social scenarios as its default activity when you are not focused on something else. This is not your mind wandering. This is your mind working exactly as designed. Here is the part that makes this stranger. Your brain cannot reliably distinguish between a situation that is genuinely unresolved and one that merely feels that way. Ambiguity is enough. A vague answer, a lukewarm response, a tone you could not quite read. The loop activates not because something is definitely wrong, but because something might be. The uncertainty alone is sufficient. And that brings us to something worth sitting with for a moment. Why this person specifically? Because you have probably noticed that not everyone gets equal space in your head. Some people you can let go of easily, others take up residence. The difference is almost never about how important the person actually is. It is about how much your sense of yourself is tangled up in what they think. Attachment researchers John Bowlby and later Cindy Hazen and Philip Shaver mapped this in detail. People with anxious attachment patterns, meaning people whose early relationships taught them that connection was uncertain or conditional, show dramatically higher rates of intrusive rumination after social threats. A comment from a boss that might mean disapproval, a friend who seemed distant, a partner who went quiet. The brain's social monitoring system flags these as potential rejection events. And rejection, evolutionarily speaking, was not embarrassing. It was dangerous. Being cast out from the group once meant not surviving, so the monitoring system is calibrated to be extremely sensitive. Possibly too sensitive for modern life, but sensitive nonetheless. There is also something almost darkly funny about this asymmetry. Thomas Jailovich and his colleagues at Cornell identified what they called the spotlight effect in 2000. People consistently and significantly overestimate how much other people are thinking about them. The person you have spent 3 days replaying in your head has, with high statistical probability, barely thought about you since the interaction ended. You are starring in a drama they have already forgotten. Your brain handed you the leading role in a production the other person does not know is running. Now here is where this stops being just interesting and starts being important. Susan Nolan Hoeksema spent decades at Yale studying what happens when the loop does not stop. What she found was not that rumination was uncomfortable. It was that chronic rumination is the single strongest predictor of depression onset, stronger than the actual negative events that triggered it. It is not the thing that happened to you that causes the most damage. It is the sustained mental rehearsal of that thing, on repeat, without resolution, that compounds into something clinically significant. Rumination also impairs working memory, degrades decision-making, and elevates cortisol in ways that carry real physical consequences over time. And here is the piece Wegner's research established that matters most practically. The person you are overthinking about stays neurologically present in your mind while you are ruminating about them. Your brain processes imagined social interaction in overlapping regions with real interaction. Every time you replay the conversation, you are in a meaningful neurological sense having it again. The exhaustion you feel is not irrational. You have been holding a meeting that never adjourns, so suppression does not work. Willpower does not work. What does work is closing the tab, not forcing it closed, giving the brain what it is actually looking for, which is completion. James Pennebaker at the University of Texas spent years researching expressive writing, and what he found is that writing out an unresolved situation in full, including what you wanted to happen and why it mattered to you, produces measurable reductions in intrusive thought. You are not venting. You are creating an ending. The brain accepts it as one. Ethan Kross at the University of Michigan found something similarly counterintuitive. When you refer to yourself in the third person while processing a difficult situation, using your own name rather than the word I, you reduce emotional intensity and increase the clarity of your thinking. You shift from being inside the experience to having a perspective on it. The distance is not emotional detachment. It is cognitive breathing room. There is also scheduled worry time, which sounds almost absurd until you understand why it works. Designating a specific 15-minute window each day for deliberate rumination trains the brain to defer the loop rather than run it continuously. Outside that window, when the thought appears, you acknowledge it and redirect. The thought frequency outside the window drops. Not because you have suppressed anything, but because you have given the brain a scheduled appointment instead of a permanent open door. And when the loop activates and the emotion is high, naming it precisely matters more than you would expect. Matthew Lieberman at UCLA found in 2007 that labeling an emotion, saying to yourself something like, "I notice I am feeling anxious about how this person sees me," activates the prefrontal cortex and measurably reduces amygdala activation. You are not talking yourself out of anything. You are engaging a different part of your brain. Observation quiets the alarm in a way that argument simply cannot. There is one more layer to this, because the techniques in Chapter 2 will help you manage the loop when it starts. But if the loop keeps starting over and over, triggered by different people across different situations, that is a different question. That is not about closing individual tabs. That is about why your browser keeps opening so many. The pattern underneath chronic rumination about other people is almost always the same thing. Your brain is using other people's opinions as its primary source of information about whether you are okay. And when that information goes missing, or turns ambiguous, or arrives in a tone you cannot quite read, the monitoring system escalates, because it has nothing else to go on. Jennifer Campbell's research on self-concept clarity is useful here. People with a clearly defined internal sense of who they are, what they value, and what they are working toward, show significantly lower levels of rumination after social rejection. Not because rejection bothers them less, but because their sense of themselves does not depend on the outcome. The rejected moment is painful, but it is not destabilizing. For someone whose self-concept is less defined, the same moment becomes a structural threat. The brain treats it accordingly. This is not a criticism. A diffuse self-concept is not a character flaw. It is often what happens when someone grows up in an environment where other people's reactions were unpredictable and carried real consequences. The brain learned to monitor externally because internal certainty was not available. That was an intelligent adaptation. It just has a high cost in adulthood. The practical implication is this: building internal clarity is not about confidence in the motivational sense. It is about having clear enough answers to specific questions that external ambiguity stops feeling like an emergency. What do you actually value? What are you genuinely trying to build? What would you think of your own behavior in this situation if nobody else's opinion existed? These are not rhetorical questions. They are structural ones. And the research from Campbell and others suggests that people who can answer them consistently are measurably less vulnerable to the loop. There is also a neurological argument for investing in meaningful personal goals, and it is more concrete than it might sound. Your brain's default mode network needs something to process. That is its function. Right now, it is processing this person, this interaction, this unresolved scenario. But the default mode network does not have loyalty to any particular content. It works on whatever open loop is most active and most emotionally weighted. Meaningful personal goals, real ones with genuine stakes, create competing open loops. They do not eliminate the person-focused rumination by willpower. They outcompete it by occupying the same cognitive space with something that matters more. 8 weeks. That is how long Norman Farb's research on mindfulness-based stress reduction found it takes to produce measurable changes in default mode network activity. 8 weeks of consistent practice reduces the baseline rate at which the brain defaults into self-referential rumination. Not 8 years, not a complete personality overhaul, 8 weeks of a specific trainable practice, which brings us back to where this started. 2 in the morning, the thought returning. The same 5 seconds of the same conversation, looping again. You have been here before, but now you know what you are actually looking at. An open loop that the default mode network has classified as unfinished business. A spotlight effect that has convinced you the other person is running the same replay when they almost certainly are not. And a suppression attempt that every time you engaged it, handed your brain a bear. That is not a character flaw. That is a system doing exactly what it was built to do, in a world it was not entirely built for. The social architecture your brain is running was calibrated for a much smaller, much more dangerous social environment, where ambiguity from the group had immediate survival stakes. The loop is your brain trying to protect you using every tool it has. It is just using them on a problem that does not require that level of response. You are not broken. You are running old software on a new situation. And old software can be updated. Not all at once, not by force, but incrementally and deliberately, with the right understanding of what the system is actually trying to do. The next time the thought comes back, you do not have to fight it. Name it. Close the tab properly. Give the browser something worth opening instead. Same architecture, different instruction.